Everything that exists is confined to a specific character at a particular place and time. If it escaped from those bonds, it would cease to be itself. Such an escape occurs continually in the realm of matter, where everything gradually lapses into something different, and this continuous flux, with its various tempos, composes the great symphony of nature. In living substance, plasticity and fertility are a virtue. Matter might say, with Shelley's cloud, I change, but I never die. That which dies at every turn is only the negligible clawback of the moment, easily replaced or even improved upon. To lament that individuals or even species should vanish would be natural only to some elegiac poet who clung to lost occasions and to remembered forms, not being ready for the next, and lagging sentimentally behind the glorious march of time, always buoyant with victory and strewn with wreckage. The case is otherwise when we come to the realm of spirit, as we do in that melancholy poet. Not that spirit is less mobile or elastic than matter. In its ideal vocation, as we shall find, it is infinitely more so. Even in its existence, it is as evanescent as any cloud, but the inevitable concentration of existence at each point into something specific rises in the moral world to a higher power. Individuation from being passive and imputed here becomes positive and self assured. Spirit, in its briefest and feeblest flash, sets up a moral center for the universe. Contingence and partiality in one direction embitter spiritual life. Why should I, that is, spirit in me, be condemned to lodge in this particular body with these parents and nationality and education and ridiculous fate? Why choose this grotesque center from which to view the universe? You may say that other people exist in plenty, viewing the universe from their several positions, so that in giving this involuntary preeminence to myself, I am perhaps not more grotesque than the average man, or even than the most intelligent. But that only makes matters worse. If isolation, partiality, error, and conceit are multiplied indefinitely and inevitably attached to conscious existence. In another direction, however, the imprisoned spirit escapes from its cage as no physical fact can escape without quitting its accidental station. It can look about, it can imagine all sorts of things unlike itself. It can take long views over the times and spaces surrounding its temporary home. It can even view itself quizzically from the outside as in a mirror and laugh at the odd figure that it cuts. Intelligence is in a humorous position. Confinement galls it. It rebels against contingency, yet it sees that without some accidental center and some specific interest and specific organs, it could neither exist nor have the means of surveying anything. It had better be reconciled to incarnation if it is at all attached to existence or even to knowledge. This is the force of intelligence, marvelous if we try to conceive it on the analogy of material being, but perfectly natural and obvious if we look at it congruously and from within. Spirit, in each of its instances, assumes a transcendental station and looks out from there on all the world, wherever it is here. Whenever it is now. Yet here and now for intelligence are not what they are for physical being or for external indication, a particular accidental dead position. For intelligence, here and now are movable essences to be found wherever spirit may wander, and they name no particular material point, but the center found at each point for all distances and directions, so that the bitterness of confinement is mitigated by a continual change of prisons and the accident of place by the inevitable vastness of the prospect. A consequence of this intellectual nature of spirit marks it particularly, or even defines it in popular philosophy. Spirit is invisible, intangible, unapproachable from the outside. The materialist might like to deny its existence, but that is not the inclination of mankind at large. Only being necessarily familiar with material things and having shaped language and expectation in conformity with physical happenings, people find it impossible not to materialize the spirit of which they are vividly conscious. So that critical philosophy sometimes, in clearing up the notion of the spirit and removing superstitious and physical analogies, seems to have nothing left. But that comes of being, like the primitive mind, preoccupied with matter and disinclined to conceive spirit in spiritual terms. This disinclination is not confined to scoffers. Religious philosophers also love to materialize spirit in order to make it seem more solid and important. The pure air of a truly spiritual sphere being far too thin and cold for their lusty constitution. Let me consider the various ways in which the notion of spirit is apt to be materialized. The sequel will then be less exposed to gross misunderstanding. Spirits in folklore, legend, and dreams are often ghosts. That is, they are visible but intangible specters of dead, absent, or supernatural persons. Such apparitions, for critical psychologists, might not be physical facts, since the images have their basis in the observer's brain and are falsely incorporated into outer space, an error that the waking dreamer himself discovers when he attempts to embrace the ghost and finds nothing but air. Genuine believers in the survival and return of the dead, like Doubting Thomas and modern spiritualists, require their spirits to be tangible as well as visible, to come and go and preserve a continuous physical existence, to eat and especially to talk. Their bodies may be called spiritual, but are conceived as extracts or magical restitutions of the human body, ethereal, astral, but not immaterial. They move about in another world or in the margins of this world, and are not pure intelligences, but complete natural individuals having a body and a soul. The native land of ghosts is memory, memory transforming sensations or drowsily confusing, recasting, or exaggerating old impressions into dreams. Imagination is fertile, and the old maxim that there is nothing in the mind which was not first in the senses seems to me far from accurate. There is never anything in the mind that at that time is not given in a kind of sensation that is given directly, but these images are not old images or fragments of old images surviving and recombined as the fragments of an ancient temple might be built into a modern wall. Images considered in themselves and objectively are essences and perfectly immaterial. That which is immaterial has no substance, no persistence, and no effects. It offers no possibility of being stored, divided, redistributed, or recombined. Ideas are not animals that may breed other animals. They may recur wholly or in part, but only when a living psyche inwardly reverts to much the same movement as on some former occasion. The given essence will then be the same or nearly the same as formerly, but it must be evoked afresh, and unless evoked, it has no existence whatever. It is truly a ghost. Belief in it is illusion, and its apparition or specious presence depends entirely on the dreaming psyche that weaves it together. Dreams and all the sensuous garments that fancy bestows on nature are made of stuff much more spiritual than any spirits supposed to be persisting and active persons stealthily revisiting the earth or sending messages to it from some neighboring region. The primitive idea that when the body sleeps, the spirit may travel to distant places and receive monitions concerning secret or future things, though poetical, is true in this sense that in dreams the contribution that the psyche makes to experience predominates over the contribution ordinarily made by external things. This predominance of the psychic we call inspiration. The existence and the rush of it are spirit itself. When this predominance is excessive and persists in waking hours, we go mad. Any strong passion in its recklessness and self-assurance has madness in it. Yet the same inspiration permeates sensibility and desire, perception and thought, all experience being but a dream controlled, and all reason but fancy domesticated and harnessed to human labors. In dreams, when the spirit seems to travel, it merely smolders like a fire, no longer fanned by the wind, and in that withdrawal and concentration, together with much fragmentary nonsense, it may develop and fancifully express its absolute impulses, building the world nearer to the heart's impulses, building the world nearer to the heart's desire. Hence, dreams may be morally prophetic, or a more voluminous inspiration from the same source may combine with waking intelligence and art to produce some work of genius. The notion that spirit can escape from the psyche or comes into us originally, as Aristotle says, from beyond the gates, merely inverts mythologically a natural truth. namely, that the spirit is immaterial and transcendental. It issues from the psyche like the genie from Sinbad's bottle and becomes, in understanding and in judgment, an authority over its source and a transcendental center for making a survey of everything. That the wildest imaginations are, in their origin, native to matter, appears clearly in this, that they are produced by drugs, nor is this incompatible with their aesthetic or prophetic or intellectual value. The priestess at Delphi inhaled the vapors of her cave before uttering her oracles. Other ritual practices have an intentionally hypnotic or narcotic influence. Wine and music, martial or religious, notoriously rouse the spirit to boldness and to conviction. Nor is this a scandal, as if pure reason could move either the heart or the world. Pure reason is an ideal brought to light in the spirit by the organization of forces, all originally irrational and wild, and this organization in turn is a product of long friction and forced adjustments. So much so that in human life, inspiration and reasoning come to seem holiday marvels, appearing when some suppressed strain or forbidden harmony is allowed to assert itself, in fancy only, during some lull in action. Prophecy is the swan song of lost causes. The action that accompanies it has no tendency to fulfill it. If it survives like Hebrew prophecy and later Judaism and in Christianity, it becomes a purely spiritual discipline, mystic where it was martial, and ascetic where it was political. The communism of Plato's Republic could be realized only in the cloister. Spirit is thus, in a certain sense, the native land of ghosts, of ideas, of phenomena, but it is not at all a visible ghost or phenomenon in its own being. Its own essence is an invisible stress, the vital, intellectual, and moral actuality of each moment. Another way in which spirit may be materialized is by confusion with the psyche and with these cosmic currents by which the psyche is fed. Wind and breath have given their name to spirit, and most aptly, the air is invisible, yet the winds are a terrible reality, and though they may soon be stilled, the calm supervening is no longer deceptive. I have learned that what seemed vacancy was a reservoir of power, that air, ether, and energy filled that apparent void. I discover that innumerable atoms are floating there, ready to make fresh havoc in the world, or to be breathed in and renew life in my breast. What is this life in me but vital oxygen drawn into my lungs? What is this warm breath exhaled but my very spirit and will? Invisible as it is, does it not quicken my body and inspire all my action? Is it not one with the spirit of the winds howling in the storm, or ruffling the sea, or carrying seas far and wide over the fertile earth? Is not the world then full of spirits? And is not spirit perhaps the one universal power astir in all things, as it stirs in me? Such poetic confusions are spontaneous in a candid mind. They may be corrected by science and by logical analysis, but it would be a foolish philosophy that should ignore the continuities and analogies that run through the universe, that at once impress the attentive poet. The principle of life is not exactly wind or air. Life began in the sea, and a great seclusion and darkness are requisite for seeds to germinate and for organic patterns to take shape undisturbed. Storms and struggles come afterwards on occasion. A normal order and distribution of elements or distinct self-defending organisms must have arisen first. Yet the currents within and without such organisms or such elements remain continuous. A psyche, the organic order and potentiality in a living body, depends upon ambient forces and reacts upon them, and the sense of this dependence and of this reaction is the spirit. The spirit is something ontologically altogether incongruous with air, ether, energy, motion, or substance. Spirit is the witness of the cosmic dance. In respect to that agitation, it is transcendental and epiphenomenal. Yet it crowns some impulse, raises it to actual unity and totality, and being the fruition of it could not arise until that organ had matured. An immense concretion of elements to make a habitat and of tropisms to make an animal must have proceeded. Being fetched from such depths, spirit feels a profound kinship with its mothering elements. It suffers with the body and it speaks for the heart. Even if it dreams that it travels to distant spheres, it merely reports in a fable the scope of physical sensibility and the depths from which messages are received. In its station, in its interest, in its language, it always remains a home. To say that it travels or witnesses the distant is as if we said that the radio conveyed us to the concert which it conveys to us. The traveling, the waves, the transmissions are all physical. How should they be anything else? Instruments are material. Even the composer, when he first conceived those accords, was listening to a spontaneous music bred in his psyche out of theoretically traceable impressions, tensions, and outbursts of potential energy within him. The chain of these motions is materially uninterrupted. Else the composer's imagined music would never have reached our ears, and spiritual union, both in perception and in passion, depends upon physical concordance. The number of spirits that may have lived through the measures of that melody helps me not at all to hear it now. The physical source must be tapped afresh in each case, and the physical receiver must be capable of vibrating afresh to the message. Spiritualists and mystics are often more perceptive than rationalists, but they are not, for that reason, perceptive of spiritual things. They are, more probably, supersensitive materially. They feel influences vibrating through the universe to which the din of vulgar affairs has deafened most of us, and they dream of physical survivals and renewals, of physical elysiums, with endless vistas of warm physical love or physical peace. They hover, they glide, they wallow, and they think themselves spirits. But there is nothing less spiritual than the shallows of indistinction and of torpid oneness. the universe is perforce one, and its parts easily break down and are lost in one another, but such collapse destroys the very possibility of spirit, which is not an ether or a fluid coursing through space, but a moral focus of recollection, discrimination, and judgment. Language in these subjects is particularly ambiguous and charged with emotion. It serves less to discriminate one thing from another than to attribute to one thing miraculously the powers and dignities of something else. So the power of nature is often attributed to spirit or identified with it, with a curious result. For if spirit be only the laws or tendencies discoverable in nature, it is only a form to be found in matter, and not an immaterial, invisible, inward intensity of being. And there is malice in this abuse of language, for we are expected to conceive that laws or tendencies are thoughts, essences being confused with the intuition of essences, and that nature, being describable in those intelligible terms, is secretly governed by intelligence, so that we may attribute power also to our own wishes and imaginations, and depute ourselves to be co-rulers of the universe. Now, our selves, our organisms or persons, undoubtedly play a more or less efficacious part in physical events. It would be a miracle if our bodies, with so much stored and redistributable energy as they contain, do not redirect by their action all sorts of other motions in the environment. A man habitually identifies himself as much with his body as with his spirit, and since both are called I, it is no wonder if what happens in each is felt to be also the work of the other, and the connection is radical and intimate in reality. The problem not being how the two happen to be united, but in what respects we may justly distinguish them. The difference between myself as a transcendental center or spirit and myself as a fact in the world is, in one sense, unbridgeable, but not because they are two facts incongruously or miraculously juxtaposed in the same field, but because they are realizations of the same fact in two incomparable realms of being. There is only one fact, more or less complex and extended, an incident in the flux of existence, and this fact lying in the realm of matter by virtue of its origin, place, time, and consequences, contains a transcendental apprehension of all things, in moral terms and in violent perspective, taken from itself as center. Such sensibility is proper to the natural fact, when this fact is a living animal. But you can no more pass at the same level from sensation to matter than you can pass from extension to duration, from color to sound, from sound to meaning, or from logic to love. The organization of matter is something logically incomparable with its mere persistence or energy, yet can only exist with the latter. So spirit is logically incomparable with body, yet is a moral integration and dignity accruing to body when body develops a certain degree of organization and of responsiveness to distant things. Nor does spirit, in its new language, discourse about anything save that very world with all its radiations in which it has arisen. Perhaps it is not logically impossible that spirit should exist without a body, but in that case, how should spirit come upon any particular images, interests, or categories? If occupied with nothing, it would not be a conscious being, and if occupied with everything possible, that is, with the whole realm of essence at once, it would not be the consciousness of a living soul having a particular moral destiny, but only a hypostasis of intelligence, abstracted from all particular occasions. But can intelligence be abstracted from particular occasions and from problems set by contingent facts? Logic and mathematics would surely never have taken shape if nature had not compelled attention to dwell on certain forms of objects or of language, and rewarded in practice the elaboration of those forms in thought. Indeed, spirit, once abstracted from animal life and independent of all facts, would have forfeited that intensity, trepidation, and movement, that capacity for inquiry and description which make spirit a focus of knowledge. It would have evaporated into identity with the realm of essence. Even divine spirits, as conceived in human poetry and religion, are thinking, loving, and planning minds, functions which all belong to animal life and presuppose it. In some speculative myths, spirit is represented as a self existent potentiality pregnant with the seeds of a particular development, so that spirit, as in a dream, gradually creates world upon world and the experience of them out of its magic bosom. There is sometimes poetic truth in such myths, but they describe from some local point of view a perspective in the realm of matter, not at all the history of spirit. Spirit is not a seed, it is not a potentiality, it is not a power, it is not even, though this touches more nearly its actual character, a grammar of thought or divine logos, predetermining the structure of creation and its destiny, that, if found anywhere, would be found in the realm of truth. But we may doubt that any alleged logos or any psychological system of categories or forms of intuition prescribes limits to the truth. It prescribes at best one type of logic, one set of senses, in which a particular existent world might be apprehended by its inhabitants. Yet these myths, as often happens, have a real foothold in the nature of the facts. They catch some transcendental privilege or predicament proper to spirit and transfer it, together with the name of spirit, to the spheres of matter or truth. Spirit has an initial vagueness. It awakes, it looks, it waits, it oscillates between universal curiosity and primeval sleep. Certainly, the feelings and images arising are specific, and spirit has no a priori notion of any different feelings or images to contrast with the given ones. Yet it is in no way predisposed or limited to these. It is not essentially, like the psyche, even a slave of habit, so as to think the given necessary and the not given impossible. Spirit is infinitely open, and this is no ontological marvel or mystic affinity of spirit to the absolute. It is merely the natural indistinction of primitive wakefulness, of innocent attention. Spirit is like a child with eyes wide open, heart simple, faith ready, intellect pure. It does not suspect the trouble the world is going to give it. It little knows the contortions, the struggles, the disasters which the world imposes on it. There is a horrid confusion in attributing to spirit the dogged conservatism and catastrophic evolution of the natural world. To the primitive blankness of spirit corresponds its eventual hospitality to all sorts of things. But this hospitality is not connivance, not complicity. It is an intellectual hospitality open to all truth, even to all fiction, and to all essence, as these things may present themselves. It is not an equal pleasure in them all. Spirit is a product of the psyche. The psyche makes for a specific order and direction of life. Spirit congenitally shares in this vitality and this specific impulse. The psyche needs to prepare for all things that may chance in its life. It needs to be universally vigilant, universally retentive. In satisfying this need, it forms the spirit, which therefore initially tends to look, to remember, to understand. But the psyche takes this step so impartial and unprejudiced officially, for a perfectly selfish domestic reason, namely, to prepare the home defenses and enlarge the home dominion. The spirit, therefore, is like Goethe's watchman, who is born to gaze and possess all the world in idea, yet was set on that watchtower for an urgent purpose, with a specific duty to be vigilant. Hence the storms and forest fires, the invasions or rebellions that he might observe would not leave him cold, but would distress him in his fidelity, disturb his power of vision, and perhaps bring him and his tower to the ground. Not that spirit trembles for its own being. It is the most volatile of things, the most evanescent, flame blown or extinguished by any wind. But no extinction here can prevent it from blazing up there, and its resurrection is as perpetual as its death. What torments it is no selfish fear, but a vicarious sympathy with its native psyche and her native world, which it cannot bear to feel dragged hither and thither in tragic confusion, but craves to see everywhere well ordered and beautiful, so that it may be better seen and better understood. This is the specific function of spirit, which it lives by fulfilling, and dies if it cannot somehow fulfill. But as it is unresisting yet indomitable in its existence, so it is resourceful in its art, and ultimately victorious, because the worst horrors and absurdities in the world, when they are past or distant, so that life here is not physically disturbed by them, can be raised in the spirit to the level of reflection, becoming mere pictures of hell, and marvelous in that capacity. Thus, a constant suggestion and echo of sorrow, which cannot but suffuse existence, adds strange dignity to the tragedy and renders the spirit freer from world and surer in its own intrinsic possessions. It is not in respect to large cosmic fatalities, such as war and death, that spirit is most perplexed. Love, self-sacrifice, and martyrdom are capable of turning those fatalities into occasions for lyrical joy and tragic liberation. The worst entanglements, from the spirit's point of view, arise within the psyche, in what in religious parlance is called sin. This strangles spirit at its source, because the psyche is primarily directed upon all sorts of ambitions irrelevant to spirit, producing stagnation, inflation, self-contradiction, and hatred of the truth. It is with difficulty that spirit can make itself heard in such a tumult. Spirit is no random blast, no irresponsible free demand, but speaks for a soul reduced to harmony and for the sane mind. This sanity implies not only integrity within, but also adjustment to the outer universe, so that whilst spirit is physically the voice of the soul crying in the wilderness, it becomes vicariously and morally the voice of the wilderness, astonishing the soul. Let me tabulate as briefly as possible the principal words and ideas that mark the differences, the bonds, and the confusions that exist between matter and spirit. Such a glossary may help the reader to criticize his favorite modes of expression and to be patient with those of other people. Body. Ancient usage identifies a man with his body, as Homer in the first lines of the Iliad. The wrath of Achilles cast many souls of heroes to Hades and themselves to dogs and vultures. And in English, we still speak of nobody and everybody. This places man quite correctly in the realm of matter amongst other bodies, but it treats him and them summarily and externally as gross units and dead weights, ignoring their immaterial properties and their subtle physical substance and relations. Organism. This word still designates the body, since the organization of an organism must exist somewhere and on a particular scale, if it is to exist at all. But a body is an organism only by virtue of its vital power of nutrition and reproduction. By these functions, bodily life becomes continuous with the ambient forces on which it feeds and theoretically with the whole dynamic universe. Thus, an organism is both a closed system of vital tropes and a nucleus in the general cosmic process. Psyche. The forms of inorganic matter, though distinct from matter logically, are clearly passive. Matter may fall into them innumerable times, yet if anywhere disturbed, they show no tendency to reinstate themselves. This tendency defines an organism. Its actual form hides a power to maintain or restore that form. This power or potentiality, often concentrated in a seed, dwells in the matter of the organism, but is mysterious, so that for observation, the form itself seems to be a power. When locked in that sort of substance or seed, and to work towards its own manifestation, the self-maintaining and reproducing pattern or structure of an organism conceived as a power is called a psyche. The psyche, in its moral unity, is a poetic or mythological notion, but needed to mark the hereditary, vehement movement in organisms towards specific forms and functions. Animal. All natural organisms have psyches and are at the same time in dynamic relations to the whole physical world. When the organism waits for favorable opportunities to unfold itself, the psyche is vegetative. When it goes to seek favorable opportunities, it is animal. This is an important step in laying the ground for spirit. The unity of the organism subtends the moral unity of the spirit, which raises that unity to an actual and intense existence. The impulse of the psyche, making for a specific perfection of form and action, underlies the spiritual distinction between good and evil, and the power of locomotion gives the spirit occasion for perception and knowledge. Will is no doubt deeper than intelligence in the spirit, as it is in the animal. Yet will without intelligence would not be spirit, since it would not distinguish what is willed or what it suffered, so that the passage from vegetation to action seems to produce the passage from a dark physical excitability to the key view of consciousness. Soul, the same thing that looked at from the outside or biologically is called the psyche, looked at morally from within is called the soul. This change of aspect so transforms the object that it might be mistaken for two separate things, one a kind of physical organization and the other a pure spirit. And spirit is in fact involved in feeling and knowing life from the inside. Not that spirit is then self-conscious or sees nothing save its own states, but that it is then the medium and focus for apprehension, and imposes on its objects categories and qualities of its own. A psyche, when spirit awakes in it, is turned into a soul. Not only can the career of that psyche now be reviewed in memory or conceived in prophecy, but many a private impulse or thought never exhibited to the world can now be added to one's history, so that oneself is now not merely the body, its power, and its experience, but also an invisible guest, the soul, dwelling in that body and having motions and hopes of its own. This soul can be conceived to issue out of the body, to pass into a different body, or to remain thinking and talking to itself without a body at all. This, for the psyche, would have been inconceivable, for as Aristotle shows, the psyche, or specific form of organization and movement in an elephant, can no more pass into the body of a fly than the faculty of cutting can pass from an axe into a lyre, or the faculty of making music from the lyre into the axe. The soul, however, having an apparently independent discoursing and desiring faculty, and a power to imagine all sorts of non-existent things, may easily be conceived to pass from one body to another as by a change of domicile, and to have had forgotten incarnations with an endless future. Self or person. If memory, dreams, and silent musings seem to detach the soul from bodily life, social relations and moral qualities may reattach the soul to the world, not now biologically, but politically. Politically, a man cannot be separated from his body, but it is not by his bodily faculties that he chiefly holds his own in society or conceives his individuality. He is a person, a self, a character. He has a judicial and economic status. He lives in his ambitions, affections, and repute. All this, again, as in the notion of the soul, cannot come about without the secret intervention of the spirit. Yet these ideas, although spirit must be there to entertain them, are not spiritual ideas. The interests chiefly concerned are those of animal or social bodies. Even moral worth or immortal life are ideals borrowed from animal impulses and animal conditions. In a different biological setting, or in a realm of pure spirits, those social duties and services would be impossible, and the will to live forever is nothing but the animal will to go on living, expressed reflectively and transferred somewhat incongruously to the social self or historical person. Spirit. Psyches, we have said, take on the character of souls when spirit awakes in them. Spirit is an awareness natural to animals, revealing the world and themselves in it. Other names for spirit are consciousness, attention, feeling, thought, or any word that marks the total inner difference between being awake or asleep, alive or dead. This difference is morally absolute, but physically, the birth of spirit caps a long growth during which excitability and potentiality of various kinds are concentrated in organisms and become transmissible. The outer difference between sleeping and waking life and death is not absolute, and we may trace certain divergences between the path of transmission for the psyche and the basis of distribution for the spirit. Life follows the seed through long periods of unconsciousness and moral non existence, whereas spirit lives in the quick interplay of each sensitive individual and the world, and often is at its height when, after keen experience, the brain digests the event at leisure and the body is sexually quiescent or reduced by old age to a mere husk. In the spirit, by definition, there is nothing persistent or potential. It is pure light and perpetual actuality. Yet the intensity and scope of this moral illumination, as well as the choice of characters lighted up, the order of the scenes, and how long each shall last, all hang on the preparations nature may have made for this free entertainment.